When true crime stories remain unsolved for years or even decades, it's easy to lose hope that the crime will ever be anything other than a mystery. But with new forensic science techniques, new investigators, and the passage of time, there's always a chance that these unsolved cases will finally be solved. Number 5. Garden Grove in Orange County, California, became the scene of two shocking true crime mysteries that would remain unsolved until recently in 2022. The crimes took place in the late 80s and cost two young women their lives. In this dark and disturbing true crime mystery case was Shannon Rose Lloyd, whose body was discovered just before midnight on May 21st, 1987. She was renting a room in a house in Garden Grove and had a son and a boyfriend who would occasionally visit. She also received visits from what the neighbors described as rough characters. Investigators ruled out the 70-year-old resident who had found the body as the criminal responsible, but actually solving the true story behind this mystery was proving much harder. The crime had become a cold case by the time Renee Cuevas was discovered 2 years later. Renee was 27 years old when her body was found at the side of a road near the El Toro Marine Base in February of 1989. DNA evidence was found at both crime scenes. In 2003, police confirmed that both true crime cases were done by the same criminal. Law enforcement used DNA found at the crime scenes to create a profile for their criminal. Then, the criminal's family tree was created using DNA evidence submitted by ordinary citizens trying to find long-lost relatives. Forensic investigators were led to Reuben Smith, who had lived in Orange County in the 1980s, but at some point had moved to Las Vegas. In 1998, he attacked another young woman. The woman was convinced he was after her life, and Smith was arrested. His DNA was put on file for a forensic investigation, but the case against him was eventually dropped. Smith passed away in 1999, but the DNA obtained from his arrest was available for law enforcement working on the cold case. The DNA matched that found at both crime scenes. Law enforcement announced that Smith was the man responsible for both of the Orange County cases, and criminal charges would have been brought against him if he were alive. Number 4. In many cold cases, a suspect is obvious from the start, but the case still goes cold when police are unable to find the evidence needed to properly investigate the crime. That was the case in the disappearance of Bonnie Heim, a 23-year-old mother of one, when she vanished without a trace in January of 1993. She was married to a man named Michael and had a 3-year-old son named Aaron. The couple worked together at a construction supply company owned by Michael's aunt, Evine, but Michael mistreated Bonnie to the point where she'd made plans to escape the relationship. She had started secreting her money away and tried to enroll her son in another preschool. Michael found out and became extremely angry. On January 6th, the couple got into another argument. That evening, Bonnie had plans with Evine to meet up to discuss a baby shower for a coworker. Bonnie called Evine to let her know that she couldn't make it. She sounded upset and said she would explain the following day. The next day, neither Bonnie nor Michael showed up for work. Michael explained that Bonnie had left at about 11 p.m. after their argument. He'd gone out searching for her, but had returned home less than an hour later. Bonnie was eventually reported missing after Bonnie's purse was found in a trash bin behind a Red Roof Inn. Michael told law enforcement that he thought his wife had gone to her mother's, but wasn't concerned when it turned out that that wasn't the case. Bonnie's car was found abandoned at the Jacksonville airport. Bonnie's father insisted his daughter was still alive and her disappearance was her own decision, but the rest of her loved ones weren't so sure. Michael became the prime suspect, especially after his son Aaron claimed that he'd witnessed what Michael had done to Bonnie. But crime scene investigators found there was not enough true evidence to prove a real crime had taken place. Aaron was adopted, and as an adult, he would sue his father for causing his mother's passing. Even without a body, Aaron won the case and received a large amount of money, along with the house that Michael and Bonnie had once shared. It was while doing work in the garden that the cold case was blown open. Aaron was renovating when he discovered human remains buried beneath a concrete slab in the backyard. DNA testing confirmed that it was Bonnie Heim. Michael was charged with taking Bonnie's life. He denied any involvement in her mysterious disappearance and passing, but was found guilty and will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Number 3. On April 20th, 1998, the body of a woman was found on the side of Route 276 in Utah, near Maidenwater Spring. She had been wrapped in plastic bags and placed in a sleeping bag before being wrapped up in a children's playmat carpet. Her body had been secured into a complex knot using duct tape and rope. The cause of her passing was a bullet. Police were stumped as to the identification of this woman, whose missing fingers made fingerprinting forensic investigation impossible. She was described as Hispanic or Native American, in her late 30s or early 40s, and had extensive dental work done. A sketch of the woman didn't lead police to any clues, and what happened to her soon became a cold case mystery. The woman was given the name Maidenwater Victim. Over the years, there were various appeals for information, including one in 2018. Investigators made the decision to show a photo of the Maidenwater victim in the hopes that it might lead to clues in this cold case, which it did. An amateur sleuth noticed similarities between the Maidenwater victim and a woman named Lena Reyes Geddes. As well as their general appearances, they both had a mole on the inside of their ear. Lena was 37 when she disappeared in April of 1998, just a few weeks before the Maidenwater crime scene was discovered. She was a Mexican national, but had met her husband, Edward Geddes, in New Mexico in 1996. They married and settled down in Youngstown, Ohio. The last time Edward saw Lena was leaving to visit her family back in Mexico from Texas, but she never arrived. It wasn't until October when Lena was finally reported missing. He didn't seem too concerned about his wife's disappearance. When investigators learned about the similarities between Lena and the Maidenwater body, they contacted Lena's family. DNA samples were taken and compared to the Jane Doe, and the unsolved case was finally solved except for one major mystery. Discovering who had taken her life would take a little while longer. At first, a convicted criminal who had taken the lives of 4 other people was considered. Scott Kimball had disposed of their bodies in the same way, and was also known to use complex knots. But after interviews with Kimball, police were able to rule him out. Advanced DNA technology finally solved this case. Traces of DNA were found on the rope that had been used to tie up Lena. By this point, Edward Geddes had passed away and his remains were no longer available, but family members provided DNA samples. It was Edward's DNA on the rope. In 2022, police finally revealed that Lena's husband had taken her life. He couldn't be brought to justice as he had passed away in 2001, but the cold case was finally solved. Number 2. In April of 1993, 20-year-old Sophie Sergi had taken some time away from her marine biologist studies at the University of Alaska so she could save money for orthodontic work. She had an orthodontist appointment in Fairbank on the 25th, so she stayed with a friend named Shirley Wasuli on the female-only second floor of the Bartlett Hall. On the night of April 24th, Shirley and Sophie were in Shirley's dorm room, along with Shirley's boyfriend. They spent the night eating pizza and watching a movie. At around midnight, Sophie left to smoke with a group of friends, smoking outside of the building. One person took a final photo which showed Sophie as her usual happy self, dancing playfully. By 1:30 a.m., Sophie hadn't returned to the dorm room. Shirley decided not to investigate her friend's disappearance, and instead, she left a note saying she and her boyfriend were going to sleep in her boyfriend's room. Sophie had the room to herself. The following morning, Shirley returned to the room to find the note was still there, and her bed hadn't been slept in. It was 2 p.m. when a janitor found Sophie's body in the bathtub. She was partially undressed and had been hit by a bullet. The case received a lot of immediate attention from law enforcement, but there were a number of problems with the crime scene investigation. Students were leaving for home as the investigation started, which made getting interviews much harder. Police also limited the investigation to the bathroom, even though nobody had heard a weapon go off. It seemed more likely that the body had been left by the criminal, and that there was a second crime scene where she had lost her life. The case went cold. DNA was collected from the crime scene and identified as male, but it wasn't a match to any DNA on record. It wasn't until the advancement of genetic genealogy testing that detectives were finally able to solve this cold case. Cold case investigators were able to link the DNA to a man named Stephen Downs, a student at the university at the time of the crime. His story was already known to investigators because they'd interviewed him along with the others, but there was no reason to suspect he was behind the crime until the DNA evidence proved otherwise. Downs tried to deny being the criminal responsible and claimed he was with his girlfriend on the night that Sophie lost her life. But he was found guilty in court and was sentenced to 75 years in prison. Number 1. On June 13, 1993, a resident of an apartment building in Minneapolis complained about water coming from another apartment. When security went to check out the apartment, they discovered a horrific true crime case. 35-year-old Jeannie Ann Childs had been attacked in her apartment with a blade. The shower had been left on, leaving water spilling onto the floor. Jeannie was 35 years old when she passed away. She was dating a man named Arthur Gray, who allegedly hustled her on the street and had clients come back to her room. The apartment was in Arthur's name, but he was in Wisconsin attending a Harley-Davidson event at the time of the crime. In 2015, cold case investigators re-examined the crime. There was DNA from an unidentified male at the scene of the crime, as well as footprints which would have been created during the attack, but the DNA didn't match any on record. It was only after genetic genealogy was used that law enforcement were able to identify a suspect. Jerry Westrom had no known connection to Jeannie. His criminal record up until that point consisted of traffic violations and one case of attempting to solicit a woman. But it was his DNA that was in Jeannie's apartment. Specially trained law enforcement officers tailed Westrom at a hockey game. At one point, he wiped his face with a napkin and threw it away. Officers took the napkin and tested it. The majority of the DNA on the napkin corresponded with the DNA found at the crime scene. Westrom was arrested. He denied any involvement in this cold case, but was found guilty of taking Jeannie's life. He was sentenced to life behind bars, and the cold case was finally solved. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.